The weekend after Thanksgiving is an important one in America. After everyone's done stuffing their faces with turkey and stuffing, they haul ass to the closest shopping centers to see how much money they can save, as nearly every other store has special deals for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. But the day I'm most interested in is Small Business Saturday. It's ironic that we have a special day dedicated to small businesses when the truth is that they're gatekept out of our cities nationwide. Now, I know the arguments that you're expecting me to make. It's because of high taxes on businesses, or people just shop online now and don't go in person to shop anymore. But that's not it. The problem here isn't at a national or state level, it's at a local one. The truth is that small businesses are basically outlawed by the zoning codes of nearly every city in America. I'm going to use Broward County, Florida as the case study to demonstrate this, but it applies almost everywhere. I'm sure everyone watching this video has heard of what a zoning code is. It's basically a set of laws, usually made at the local level, that determine what the owner of a property is allowed to build depending on where the property is, such as what types of uses are allowed in your project, how tall it's allowed to be, or even how many trees you're required to have on the property. These laws started becoming a thing during the 20th century in the US, and while they started relatively small, they were always exclusionary, and often racist. San Francisco tried banning laundromats in 1885 to kick out Chinese people, and in New York, the high-end shops on Fifth Ave got the city to ban garment manufacturers near Fifth Avenue, specifically to make sure that Jews and poor people wouldn't be near Fifth Avenue shopping centers. These codes just kept growing and getting more and more restrictive over time, and now we've inherited this broken and inflexible system. For the purpose of this video, there are three main things that modern American zoning codes do that kill small businesses: exclusionary zoning, minimum lot sizes, and parking requirements. Most American cities practice exclusionary zoning, which means that the different zones are separated by use. If you've ever played SimCity, exclusionary zoning is basically the practice of saying some areas can only have residential uses, and commercial uses can only go in another. Here's a map of Broward County's future land use map. This is the basis for the zoning code of all the municipalities inside the county's area. All the browns, yellows, and shades of beige are residential-only zones. No commercial uses allowed. Want to open a doctor's office? Nope. Want to open a small cafe or bookstore? Illegal. Want to open a pre-K? Straight to jail. You're not allowed to operate a business from your own property that you live in if it's zoned residential. The red and solid blue areas are the only places commercial is allowed in the county. As you can see, it's not a lot of land. You're only allowed to operate a business on roughly 20% of the land in the county. That means that there's a lot of competition for businesses to be able to own or rent a very limited amount of space, driving up prices. Factor in that these commercial zones are your downtown areas and high-traffic corridors where you can expect lots of people, and this land is incredibly expensive. Using Plantation as an example, commercial zone land will typically cost between $600,000 and $1 million per acre just in land costs, while residential zone land will typically cost half as much. In Fort Lauderdale, it's even more extreme, with commercial or downtown land costing upwards of $10 million per acre, and residential being as low as $200,000. If you want to open a business in Broward, you're competing against companies like Chipotle, Chick-fil-A, Bank of America, and some of the biggest law firms in the country for a very small amount of space. Then, most cities typically have this thing called minimum lot sizes. This has been talked about quite a bit in urbanist groups, typically when they're talking about affordable housing, but the same concepts apply for commercial spaces. A minimum lot size is exactly what it sounds like. You have to purchase some minimum amount of land to be able to build anything on your property. It varies widely from city to city. Here in Broward, some commercial zones have minimum lot sizes of 5,000 square feet, which isn't that bad, to as many as 5 acres minimum. This means that the city requires you to purchase from $100,000 at the smallest to $5 million worth of dirt before you're even allowed to build anything. The only reason to have this law is economic exclusion. You have to have a lot of money up front before you can open a business. Finally, there are parking requirements. This is one of the most talked about concepts in urbanism and planning communities because it's one of the most destructive. Most of the research on parking requirements reflects how it damages the environment, encourages people to drive more, and decimates walkability and transit in urban areas. But there's one other big issue with it, which is that minimum parking requirements massively drive up the cost of development. Every city here in Broward County has minimum parking requirements, with different ratios for every use imaginable. For example, in Plantation we require 1 parking space for every 50 square feet of video game establishment, 1 space for every 4 seats in a restaurant, and even 1 space for every 4 seats at a bar or brewery. You heard that right, we require bars to provide parking for their patrons who are presumably going to drink alcohol so that they can drive back home. Life safety issues aside, this means that parking takes up a lot of space. When you include the area in front of the space for a car to be able to back in and out, each parking space takes up 350 square feet. If you want to open a small 500 square foot microbar or arcade, you have to provide 3,500 square feet of parking space. In other words, you need to buy 7 times more land than your actual business needs just to be able to fit in parking. Then, you have to pay to actually pave the parking at about $10,000 per space for an extra $100,000 in construction costs. But what if there's vacant commercial space already and you just want to fill it in? Well, that's also difficult to do without building more parking. For most zoning codes, changing the use of any existing space, say from a toy store to a gym or a grocery store, often triggers higher parking requirements than what exists on the property, making your business illegal to open unless you build extra, often unneeded parking or get a waiver. This exact situation happened here in Plantation recently, where a strip mall had a huge vacant space that used to be a large retailer, and the gym wanted to occupy that space. The change in use required them to provide 41 extra parking spaces to a strip mall that already had over 500 of them. Again, the city made it illegal to open a business in an already existing building unless it spent over $400,000 building unnecessary parking. Between exclusionary zoning, minimum lot sizes, and parking requirements, cities have basically mandated that you need to have access to millions of dollars up front to be able to open up a new business. While you can get financing for it, it's a difficult process that the vast majority of people don't want to go through. So what do we need to do to allow small businesses to exist in America again? We need to eliminate those 3 zoning practices: exclusionary zoning, minimum lot sizes, and parking requirements. It sounds radical, but a ton of American cities have been doing this to varying degrees. Dozens have eliminated minimum parking requirements entirely, with new ones in the news every other week. Some cities are following Houston's lead in reforming or abolishing minimum lot sizes. And of course, more and more cities are chipping away at exclusionary zoning by creating mixed-use zoning districts. Thankfully, there's one place that provides a great example of what a city can become when it does all 3 of these reforms. In Japan, the zoning is set at a national level, and it's much less complicated than American zoning. They have 9 zones total, and none of them are completely exclusionary. Residential and commercial uses are allowed in almost all of them. If you have a home in Tokyo and you want to use the first floor as a hair salon, get the clippers ready. Cafe? Sounds delicious. Office space that you can rent out to a neighbor? Go ahead. Japan also doesn't have minimum lot size or parking requirements, so you don't have to have a bunch of land in the first place to be allowed to build something. You just need the space that your home or business will physically use. Because Japan allows commercial anywhere and very small lot development, they have an abundance of cheap places for businesses to operate, and it enables a lot more people to open up whatever business they want. People are able to pursue their passion, and you can find weird things like California-themed bars, mochi takeout windows, and limited edition video game stores. Because it's so cheap to open a business, they don't need to make a ton of money to stay afloat, and landlords aren't forced to only rent to the big companies that have a lot of money. I know what you're probably thinking, but that's Japan. They have a totally different culture from America. While that's true, this practice of small businesses everywhere isn't a product of their culture, it's a product of their laws. There's a fantastic book called Emergent Tokyo, Designing the Spontaneous City, written by Joe McReynolds and Jorge Almazan, that goes to great lengths to explain this as a product of their laws and not of their Japaneseness. In fact, look at any picture of any American city from the early 1900s before zoning existed. You'll see neighborhoods with a mixture of apartments and single-family homes, restaurants, churches, bookstores, parks. Everything was allowed, and it led to the creation of incredibly livable and affordable cities. The most sought-after neighborhoods in the U.S. today, like most of Manhattan, Chicago, and Boston, were all built during this time and still retain that form even after more than 100 years. We did it like this in the past, and we can do it again. Finally, if you're thinking, I live where I do for the peace and quiet, businesses are loud, messy, and have more traffic than residential streets, why would I want to live near that? Well, I'm stealing the answer to that from M. Nolan Gray in his book Arbitrary Lines, How Zoning Broke the American City and How to Fix It. Basically, no one wants to deal with negative externalities or nuisances, not suburbanites and not city dwellers either. But we should be regulating those nuisances directly through things like noise ordinances or pollution ordinances. If deliveries cause headaches for neighbors, mandate that the deliveries have to be done at certain periods of the day when there's not much traffic. Basically, tackle the problem itself. Don't ban businesses and daily necessities from existing in neighborhoods. It just requires courage and leadership, and a lot of people going to city hall meetings to demand change. We can bring back classic, walkable, and affordable American cities, or even build some new ones. Think about that for next year's Small Business Saturday.